when he or anybody else comes along, we will just,
That's fine. Can somebody put on the chat the handout? I don't mean to be complaining. I just can't. I can't see when you have stuff projected, particularly if it's double pages. I mean, I can't read it, so I have to have the document in order to follow along. So I hate to be a complainer about it.
So here's what, Ashley, if you would not mind enabling share screen, I will. It keeps telling me that you've disabled it.
I didn't make you the co-host yet.
Well.
But you should have it now.
Yes. And here it is. So Daniel, now you should be able to see it on your screen.
And I'm not exaggerating, but what I'm looking at is approximately a 2-point font. If I were to get my face with a magnifying glass right next to my screen, I would be able to read it.
Would you like me to blow it up?
No, what I do is just go, that I can read. But what I can do is if I have the document, I just kind of alt tab between what you're talking about and reading it. And that works great. And that way I don't have to worry you about, sizing your screen because I can't read.
So Ashley has just put the, put it up there in the chat. But I'll blow it up myself. Wouldn't be the first class I've had that's blown up.
Okay.
Ashley,
are you wanting to start, or are we waiting for Del?
Yeah, no, we'll go ahead and start. And there'll always be a place to jump in. So this is Shabbat Zachor, right? This is where this Shabbat morning is when we're going to read the little piece in Parshat Ki-Tetzei, which says, remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt. Now, why is that the Shabbat before Purim? Because you note that this Shabbat is the Shabbat before Purim, right? So according to tradition, Haman was an Amalekite. He was a descendant of these people. And I don't know if that's real or if that's just kind of, Amalek is a symbol of all the evil Jew haters everywhere. But here's the text. This is the piece we're going to read in the second Torah on Shabbat. Remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt. Okay? You shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under the heaven. Do not forget. Okay? So there's that little contradiction there. But also, why is it that you have to especially remember or especially blot out the memory of Amalek? And so there are different theories about that. One of them I just quote from the Horwitz Chumash. Right? Horwitz says, a people so devoid of natural religion as to kill non-combatants had forfeited all claim to mercy. Now, there's a certain point where evil just becomes unredeemable. Right? That's what Horwitz says. Right? So we're just going to blot out their memory. Right? That's one position. Here's another position. Right? You compare this to other things in Parshat Ki-Tetzei, where it says, you shall not hate an Edomite, for he is your brother. Good or bad, he's your brother, right? The Edomites are neighbors. You shall not abhor an Egyptian. You were a sojourner in his land. The Egyptians might be good or bad, but you lived there for many years. It wasn't such a thrill, but yes, you lived there. You know the Egyptians, and you also know that even in Egypt, where the Jews were enslaved, there were good people too. Amalek, forget about it, right? They are the persecutor of the weak, and just, we're not having anything of them. We will blot out their memory. Right? Interesting piece that I came across that was written right after the bombing in Oklahoma City. Right? Written by Frank Rich of the New York Times, noted rabbinic authority. Right? But what he said is good food for thought. He says, closure surely is a balm for grief, and we can only hope that the mutilated families will find it. But if the rest of us are now lulled into complacency by a well-conducted trial's fair outcome, that's not closure, it's amnesia. Timothy McVeigh didn't come from nowhere. Okay. So I thought that was, an appropriate thought to bring when we're talking about Amalek and remembering what Amalek did to you. Okay. You have the trial for McVeigh, and then you have, he's put to death, and that doesn't make it over, right? Yeah, that's, that is what the justice system requires, but it's not closure. For certain things, it's not about having closure. It's about how you prevent it from happening again. It's about how you think about, someone or some people who are so evil that there's no other way to think of them. Mm-hmm. And so now, we come to the book of Esther itself and what we say about what it says about the Jews there, right? Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the other peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of any other people and who do not obey the king's laws. It is not in your majesty's interest to tolerate them. If it please the king, let it be written that they be destroyed. Right? That's Haman. That's Amalek. Right? And one of the things that we see is that this kind of evil doesn't completely disappear. You may go for a long time without seeing it. And then along comes someone like Timothy McVeigh. Right? You can go a couple of generations without seeing it. But it keeps popping up. So this next piece is from right around 1800 in Germany, okay? And here is someone who was a major figure in his time, a head of a university. You think of universities as, places, freedom of expression, equal rights for people. You don't think of it as a place where, it's basically a mouthpiece for evil, right? So when it talks about, as many people did in that time, granting the Jews civil rights in Germany, he says, the only way we're going to do that is to cut off all their heads on one night and substitute other heads without a single Jewish thought in it. Now, what's the difference between that and Haman? It's not a tremendous amount. Okay. And of course, we have plenty of anti-Semites like that today. Here's what the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre has to say about I can't do this here. Hold on. There we go. Okay. So see, the Jew serves the anti-Semite as a pretext. Okay? Elsewhere, his counterpart will make use of the Negro or the man of yellow skin. In other words, hatred is hatred. Right? And if it's not hatred directed at the Jews, it's going to be directed at somebody else. Right? But there's no big difference between hate against one people and another. Yeah, Daniel.
So I'm not sure how I feel about that statement. I used to think that anti-Semitism had a certain uniqueness in the pantheon of hate, that there was something about anti-Semites and their hatred of Jews specifically that was different than your run-of-the-mill racism that Jean-Paul Sartre is comparing it to. I'm not so sure of that anymore. I have an ambiguity about the topic, but I was wondering if you could comment as to some of your thoughts. Do you think that anti-Semitism is a different kind of otherness, a different kind of racism, if you will, although we all know that being Jewish is not a race?
Right.
Do you agree with Jean-Paul Sartre or not?
I find it hard to argue with him. I recently read this book, and I'm trying to think of the author's name, but it's the title of the book is Caste. All right. It's been a bit on the bestseller list for a number of months, and it was a very convincing read. What it took basically the caste system of India, the Nazi attitude towards the Jews, and racism against Blacks in America. And it showed that really all of them were caste systems, that they enabled certain people, no matter whether they were rich or poor, they could feel superior to the under group. One of the most interesting things I found in the book was it says that the Nazis when they were designing discriminatory laws, not too long after 1933, they started to put many of those laws in effect in 35. Not that there wasn't a lot of, hateful stuff being done to Jews as soon as, even before the Nazis took over, and certainly as soon as they took over. But they were figuring out exactly how they wanted to legislate this. And they got hold of some of the laws in the United States about how Blacks were to be treated, laws against miscegenation, laws relating to property, et cetera, et cetera. And the Nazis designed many of the laws discriminating against Jews based on what already existed in this country in the 1920s and 30s.
There was some famous Nazi that said something like, I don't know whether this is if this is the truth or not, but he said, "You taught us how to do this," or something like that. Have you ever heard that quote before?
I don't recognize it, but it wouldn't shock me.
Yeah,
because
I think that's true.
mean, look, hatred of the outsider or the lower caste or whatever it is, it's a very old emotion. So wouldn't surprise me to find that the Nazis themselves said that, I mean, they looked at the racist laws in the United States, and they could also have looked at, South Africa or any number of other places. They could have looked at the whole Dreyfus case in France and much of the anti-Semitism that existed there.
Did you ever read a book called The Willing Executioners by Daniel Golden something or something?
Goldhagen, yes. Yeah. I have it somewhere here.
If I remember right, it's a long time ago that I read it, but his idea was that German anti-Semitism was qualitatively different than Polish or French or any other European countries' anti-Semitism.
They systematized it. Even the Russians, even the czars rarely went so far as to systematize anti-Semitism. It was kind of a here and there thing. When there were pogroms in, let's say, 1903, the famous Kishinev pogrom, right? It was one of many, but it wasn't like, okay, we are going to kill all the Jews. It was, we'll terrorize them and we'll allow it in a bunch of places. The Nazis just made it into a system. So yeah. But, and again, I think Sartre is right too. Ultimately, hatred, particularly if it is systematized, just, leads to other hatreds. I mean, the Ku Klux Klan was no friend of the Jews. And I'm not sure that you could have taken, Asian Americans and put them into concentration camps in this country in the 1940s if it had not been for the fact that we already had a lot of racism in this country. And it was
there was a lot of German backlash too, but we didn't put Germans into concentration camps.
Right.
Now the difference being that they're white.
Yeah. Yeah.
When did Sartre write this?
Anti-Semite and Jew, I think, was written right after the war.
Okay.
But I'm not sure. Don't hold me to that.
Pronounce his last name for me. I'm not sure how to do it. Do you pronounce
Sartre? Sartre.
Sartre. I'm saying it more or less correctly then. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a friend of mine whose last name is Lissart, but he does not pronounce that rit thing at the end. Of course, my name is Bissonnet, not Bissonette. So there you go.
Well, you know, you're just one of those foreigners. That's all.
Yeah. A frog, no less. Did I say that? Oh my God, my speaker's on. Excuse me.
You're just on the road.
Okay, I didn't mean to take us off on too much of a digression there, but it's
quite all right.
It's a subject that fascinates me. So
yeah. Okay. So here's another view about Amalek. All right. So let's blow this up a little bit. This is from a fairly contemporary rabbi, I think died not so long ago. Essentially, all agree that what the Amalekites did was utterly reprehensible, yet it never could have happened if the Israelites had not brought their vulnerability upon themselves. In this regard, the Chafetz Chaim deemed the quarrelsome state of the Israelite community with its incessant internecine feuding as the causative factor in bringing about Amalek's attack. And he says, had the Israelites but been unified as a community, the divine clouds would surely have shielded them from all harm. And he concludes his observations with an appeal for unity among his contemporaries, bidding them to heed the truth of the promise that as long as Israel remains unified, Amalek has no power over them. Now, I'm not sure I agree with that 100%, but there's certainly a piece of truth in it. And that if you are not unified, or if you are distracted by all this other stuff going on, that leaves you vulnerable to outsiders who want to take you down.
But the problem with that is we have an entire state of Jews now who God only knows has their internecine feuding, but they also are one of the most economically and militarily strongest nations in the world, particularly if you count in the fact that they're so small. They've done quite well, and even though they argue amongst themselves, and that to me kind of goes against this.
When it comes to military matters, there's relatively little disagreement. In, political matters, there's plenty of disagreement. But when it comes to having a strong army and having our, giving that army the means with which to defend itself, and having an army and reserves, of course, because practically everybody serves in the reserves until they're 50, right? You have pretty much unity throughout the country. Nobody argues that, we shouldn't have that kind of an army. And it's very rare that the disputes about other things become a distraction from self-defense.
That's a very good point.
My thoughts.
Rabbi Elijah Shochet
Yes.
That's kind of a weird name.
Well, he probably had an ancestor who was a shochet.
Okay. I've never heard that one. I mean, I know what a shochet is, but
Yeah.
I've never heard of somebody name that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of Jews are named Diamond. Right? Why do you think they got that name?
Well, because they dealt in diamonds.
There you are.
There you are.
So Rabbi Shochet's ancestor probably dealt in shechting.
Silver.
I'm sorry?
Silver. Well, silver is a common Jewish name,
Yes.
Is it not? Right?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Goldstein.
Yes. Horwitz.
What does that mean?
That has nothing to do with anything. It's came after a town in Czechoslovakia.
Well, the word wits, as I understand it, if anytime you hear the word wits in a name, that the first part of it is the name of the town.
Very likely.
I think wits means, in what, Polish, Russian? It means town or city.
That could be. I do not know. Yeah. I just know that I'm named after a town. Probably not a real great town either. I mean, how great was a little town in Czechoslovakia in the 14th century? It's probably not a great place to live.
What I'm always surprised about your last name is the number of variations. You're Horwitz. There's also Horowitz, and there's Hurwitz.
Yes.
I assume
they
that you were
all the same. They were all the same
at some point
until they left Jewish communities. And in fact, my name spelled in Hebrew is the same as Horowitz or Hurwitz. It's, it doesn't appear any differently. If you read the name Horwitz in a book in Hebrew, it's going to be spelled the same regardless of how it was spelled outside of, Hebrew users. Be that as it may, so it just goes to show that I have no real claim to fame. Back to Amalek. So what do we got here? Right here.
He's surprised.
Yeah.
I can't figure out what is that. This whole next 3 paragraphs all in the Midrash.
A lot of this is midrashic stuff here coming up. Okay, so here, well, I should say a word or two before we go into the midrashic stuff. Because how do we think of Amalek? We think of Amalek as, it suggests a certain kind of behavior. Hi, Barbara.
Hi, Barbara.
It suggests a certain cowardly behavior, right? You attack the women and the children in the rear, right? The ugliest, most wicked people you could think of, right? So in our Jewish consciousness, it's always been associated with pogroms, with Haman, with certain countries like Nazi Germany. Now, Amalekite behavior can be applied universally, right? We all know of, organized terrorism, brutal acts directed against defenseless people, right? You think of Boko Haram, right? And you think of the terrorist acts of 9/11, right? and that's kind of a throwback to the Amalekites. You know, in the past, we might have felt a little uncomfortable about the idea of blotting out the memory of the Amalekites, completely eradicating them. No, but you know, after 9/11, you know, I'm sure there's a lot of people that if they understood that this was, you know, one particular branch of Islam, a particularly ugly branch, right? You know, if you're talking about completely obliterating those terrorists, that I think is comparable to what it says here about blotting out the Amalekites. Right? And of course, this is a mitzvah. It is considered one of the 613 mitzvot to remember Amalek. You know, it's one that we Jews particularly understand because we've been victimized so many times in so many places. All right, moving right along. All right, so here's this piece, and I actually, you know, I didn't specify exactly where it comes from, but I have these 3 paragraphs, and they're all from those 2 sources. Okay, so the word korcha, that he surprised you. And Rabbi Judah reads this as, he took advantage of your impurity. Right? Because there's a similar word used in Deuteronomy about a mikra, an emission that renders one unclean. Okay? So maybe it's an indirect reference to the rape of the women. But it also might be a reference to the kind of disunity and the complaining among the Israelites at that stage in the, you know, the first weeks in the desert. So I don't know which it is, but I just thought this was particularly unusual. Okay. Next. Rabbi Nehemiah reads this word korcha, surprised, as referring to kriya, reading. Okay? It's saying how they read up on the Israelites. And this is really far-fetched, but it's interesting, and it has an application. Right? What did Amalek do? He went to the archives of Egypt, took from them the genealogical rolls with the names of the Israelites recorded. Then he stationed himself outside the cloud of glory, which protected the Israelites, and would read and call out the names. You know, I am your brother, come forth. I wish to do business with you. And then when one of the Israelites, whose name was thus called out, went forth, Amalek killed him. Why? Because that's what Amalek does. Right? You know.
I find that Jews are smarter than that. I mean, after the first, or you know, after Reuben, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda all get killed, you would think they'd figure it out. You know, don't go talking to the Amaleks. They're just calling out names at random. That's kind of a stupid story.
Well, maybe, but I think you want to look at the the story behind the story. In other words, that if that you can be surprised at how vulnerable you become when you go outside the cloud of glory. Right? Now, in the rabbinic mind, the cloud of glory is like a statement of faith, right? Because that's, that's God's protection. Well, God doesn't protect those who don't believe in him. Right? So if you go out from under the cloud of glory, in other words, if you drop the faith that sustains you, that protects you, then you become vulnerable. And you become vulnerable in many senses, including, that you're in this state of disunity, or maybe that you no longer even identify with the people. So maybe, just, interesting if you look at it that way rather than taking the story literally. All right, the last piece here. The other rabbis looked at the word korcha, and you've already seen two different meanings here. This one says it refers to kar, which means cool. Amalek cooled you. Amalek made Israel appear among the nations as cool, as weak. All right? You don't want to, as Rav Huna said, you don't want to jump into a boiling pot of water. But somebody comes along and jumps into it, and everybody else says, oh, well, okay, so it's fine. So too, when Israel came out of Egypt, fear of their burning zeal fell upon all the nations of the earth. But after Amalek came and made war upon Israel, though he got the scalding he deserved, still he made Israel appear cool in battle in the eyes of the other nations. So again, it's a matter of how the Israelites become vulnerable, right? Through their own disunity or their own lack of faith, which we will see later, with the story of the spies going into the Holy Land. Okay. Questions or comments up to here? All right. So let me just leave you with a couple of observations and questions, because we know that other nations do evil things, right? So why does the Torah single out Amalek for destruction, for special remembrance? So the rabbis looked at what Amalek did and the results, when they attacked Israel. So one of them, this first one here, says it just associates it with the specific humiliations that were inflicted upon the women. Right? Another one says it's just so incredibly devious. Right? We sneak them into public. We lull them into a state of vulnerability. Right? And others look at it, this broader picture, right? Which is, Amalek opened the way for others to see Israel as vulnerable. So do you have your own understanding? Do you have an understanding of what Amalek represents? Is there something here that makes better sense to you? Yeah, Del.
I was always taught that Amalek attacked the camp from the rear, which is where all the weak and infirm were.
Right, that's what it says in the Torah.
And so instead of coming and making war on the men, bringing a fight, he just went and attacked the weak and infirm that were totally defenseless.
Mm-hmm. And
like trying to be a bully.
Uh-huh. And so when the Israelites fight back, they're standing up to the bully.
Right.
Okay.
I am gonna give the conversation a little bit different spin, just to stir up some discussion.
But that's totally out of character, Daniel.
There's something in modern thought called I can't remember the exact term, I'm drawing a blank on it. It's when you have an imbalanced war where one side is exceptionally strong and the other side is exceptionally weak. What is that called? It's
called the war in Vietnam.
Well, it turned out that they weren't as weak as we thought.
Correct.
So, but a disproportional power struggle, and a lot of people, when they find themselves in that position, fight back viciously, or they don't follow the Queen's rules, the Robert's Rules of Order. They don't fight fairly.
They don't fight by the Geneva Convention.
Right. But also when confronted with what could reasonably be considered the absolute right side and the absolute wrong side, Americans and the Allies and the Russians fighting the Nazis. Okay, we had to win.
Right.
So we bombed cities filled with civilians and no military value because we had to win that war. We bombed, we could have lost hundreds of thousands of Americans trying to invade Japan. And we chose not to do that. I mean, I don't know that there's things that are wrong about that. I mean, war is war. So why would we pick on the Amaleks to, that they were fighting a war of invasion. From their perspective, they needed to win. And what did they do? They knew that if they confronted the Israelites straight on, mano a mano, they were going to lose. So they ate around the sides. They picked on the weak. Would we have done something all that differently?
Well, maybe we would.
Del,
you were going to say something.
Well, you mentioned about us using the A-bomb on Japan as opposed to invading. How many hundreds of thousands of Japanese would have been killed in the invasion?
Yeah,
just conventional.
Well, I was arguing, Del, that it was an okay thing to do. I think that Truman made the right decision, not the wrong decision.
With Amalek coming and attacking our people thousands of years ago, they attacked us.
Correct.
We were just passing through, and they came and attacked us.
Yes.
If they would have just stood back, we'd have just gone on through, and they wouldn't have lost man.
How did they know that?
Did they come talk to us?
Well, we just read about the fact that we were commanded to go through and kill the Edomites and the Hittites and several other without any mercy whatsoever. So they were kind of right about us, that we could have very well done it with them.
We weren't commanded to kill them, not until after they attacked us.
Yeah.
I don't think that's what I read a couple of weeks ago.
Well, what we do read back at the beginning of this piece is, what is it about Amalek? First of all, undeterred by fear of God, right? So there's, if you don't have any fear of God, if you don't have a willingness to fight fair, then you don't try to make peace, and you don't, mano mano, as you put it, right? They just attack the stragglers in the rear, right? So when you look back at that, that seems to be what the text is saying. That's the reason to remember what they did and to blot out their memory.
What is that? Is there another? What does that phrase mean in the Hebrew? I mean, for fear of God. I don't think they mean fear. What are they?
Well,
what is another way of translating that?
Well, let me just pull up the text here. Say, right. It says, below Yareh Elohim. Okay, so the word Yareh, as I suspected, is the key word there. And Yareh, or Yira, as it's, in the noun form, Yira has several connotations. It can mean fear, but it can also mean awe, or it can mean reverence. And so if they are undeterred by any sense of reverence for God or for God's law, right? It means that they don't have a sense of, that there's something wrong about slaughtering innocent people. It's just, it's not a concern.
Can it be interpreted any stretch of the imagination as they're not referring to, they're referring to the Jewish God, and that if you don't worship the Jewish God or believe in the Jewish God or follow the Jewish God, then almost by definition that means you're not Jewish. Well, so this can be read, after you left, however, well, go on. I'm sorry. You get my point.
Yeah. I think in a world where there are not so many Jews, and it's like this one small people, you don't expect that they think of things in terms of the God of Israel. Whatever religion they have, if it doesn't prevent them from attacking the rear stragglers, the women and the children and the elderly and so forth, then that religion doesn't count. That's not true religion. Which is a way of saying, I suppose, you can have other religions. It's not that everybody has to become Jewish. Judaism was never a salvational religion in that way. But there are some, so there's Judaism. There are other religions which contain God's truth, but there are also religions that really prompt people to do evil, that make it acceptable to do evil.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to bring it to a close here. Thank you very much. I'm sure that if this week had been a little different, some other people would have joined us, but I'm glad that you guys did. Ashley, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Next time, Shabbat Shalom. Del, see you soon.
Yes, good Shabbos.
All right, good Shabbos, everybody.